Thank you all for being here this morning. I'm Tim Grieve. I'm the editor-in-chief of NOTUS and the executive director of the Allbritton Journalism Institute. Yes, I have more syllables in my title than most people. I'm super glad you're all here, especially this morning after what I know was a late night for many of you. Some of you were on the air, some of you were in your apartments or houses watching, but it was a late night for all of us. I don't know if we planned for this event to be as timely as it actually is, but boy, is it timely. I think we're 44 days into the Trump presidency, and each day for journalists presents a new and different challenge for how to cover it. Last night was certainly no different. We deal with those challenges every day at AJI, where we are training the next generation of young reporters, and at NOTUS, where those young reporters work hand in hand with professional veteran reporters on our staffs to produce nonpartisan, trustworthy journalism about what's happening in Washington. So we deal with this stuff every day. It's a great privilege and thrill for me to sit back and listen to how some of the best journalists in the country, how they deal with it for a change. So I'm super excited for this morning's conversation, and I'd love to welcome our own Jasmine Wright to get us started. Jasmine.
Okay, hello. Thank you so much, Tim. Thanks, everybody, for coming. We're going to get started quickly. But it's a great turnout, and I'm excited for this and to have much more, and I hope to see you guys at more of them with me. So I am glad to introduce our panel of reporters. First up, we have Dasha Burns from Politico. Welcome, welcome. We have Major Garrett from CBS. We have Jonathan Karl from ABC. And last but certainly not least, we have Miss Vitali from MSNBC. Yes, give them a round of applause. So obviously, we were up late last night. President Trump's first address to a joint session of Congress since returning to Washington, a big moment from him.
And longest.
The White House. I was up on C-SPAN breaking it down. I know you guys were on air and waiting to get on air this morning. Quickly, in one sentence, I want to go down the line, and I want to hear your impressions of both the substance and the tone from last night. You go first.
Tone reminded me a lot of a Trump rally with slightly fewer improvisations. And on substance, there was a lot of policy talk, but in terms of some of his top promises on immigration, especially on the economy, not a whole lot new and not a whole lot of updates on exactly what direction he's going to be taking there.
The president said it's a revolution of common sense. Whether it's common sense or not, the public will decide in due course. But the revolution word is important. This administration seeks to revolutionize the understanding of the federal workforce, cryptocurrency, the Federal Reserve, spending, executive power, and many, many other topics. And that fervor and the non-compromising orientation that every revolutionary takes into a political battle was on full display last night.
I mean, one thing that struck me is there's a lot of anxiety in the country about what's going on. There's anxiety about what's happening in Washington. The tariffs had just dropped. We saw the markets react to that, saw how businesses reacted to that. There's anxiety among the federal workforce. There's anxiety around the world after what happened in the Oval Office on Friday with Zelensky. The Donald Trump that walked into that chamber seemed to be, I mean, he's always a confident guy, but he doesn't seem to be concerned about anything. He seems to be peak confidence. He is, no longer under investigation for the first time in his life as a political figure. He is, seemed to me to be like he's not afraid of anything. And the Republicans in that chamber, as fervent in their support as we have ever seen. Remember when he did his last State of the Union in 2020, or any of the previous four, there were Republicans in Congress that were not on board. There were pockets of resistance. McConnell and Ryan, the leadership wasn't fully in Trump. I mean, that was, peak Trump in many ways.
Yeah, emboldened and unconstrained, right? In large part because the institutions of Washington have allowed him to be so. And I think as someone who has covered Trump and also has intimately covered Congress, you watched on full display, I think, the starkest divide between the parties when you looked at the chamber and the reactions that they were having last night. You know, for Republicans, it's long been true that this is the most MAGA Congress that Trump will ever have. And so when the wind is blowing at your back and you've got a whole list of policy priorities, let's actually see what you can get done. This is peak MAGA in a policy-making way, as well as in a tone and in a substance way. So to me, that was what I watched the most closely. But then secondly, and we're all disobeying your one-sentence rule.
Just naughty.
Yep.
Keep going.
Very good host behavior. The other piece of this, though, is you saw the full range of Democratic dissonance on how best to respond. Is it in a pink suit? Is it with a subtle nod to Ukraine? Is it by standing up and holding your cane and getting ejected from the chamber, as Al Green did? Is it Alyssa Slotkin saying, I hear you on cutting waste, fraud, and abuse, but we can't do it this way? That's going to be something to watch, too.
Yeah, I mean, they were kind of all over the place, quite frankly.
In disarray, as one said.
Dims in disarray. I'm going to pick on something that you said, though, Allie, because I think what's so strong about this panel is that we all have really varying degrees of what administrations we've covered, what Congresses we've covered. In some form, we covered the first Trump administration, the Biden administration, obviously, that campaign of last year that caused a lot of people a lot of stress. I wonder, though, when it comes to covering Trump 2.0, specifically talking about your reporting, how has your approach in these last 40-something days, even starting in transition, how has it changed from the first administration, or has it not at all?
I think, and these guys were out on the road with me in 15 and 16, too, we were building the plane as it flew. Then. I mean, all of the norms, all of the bluster, all of the need for fact-checking, that was all something that we were figuring out in real time. How do you tell people that the likely nominee, who then became the president, wasn't, constrained by the truth in many instances? I think that media has caught up to the pace. They've caught up to all of those various pieces. But I think the biggest way that my reporting has changed is in the early days of the first administration and first campaign, you used to have all these fiefdoms playing against each other. And you had that in the campaign, too. But it feels right now the leaks are minimal. Everyone is marching in lockstep. They are all on the same page about what they're trying to do with this term.
Well, Ali, you talked about building the plane from the media perspective. I mean, the Trump administration in the first term was doing the same thing. This time around, that is completely different. In fact, I had a source point to something really interesting, which is he said that if Trump had been reelected immediately, a lot of what we're seeing right now may not have happened or may not have happened until the very end. It was because of those 4 years in between where you had Heritage, you had AFPI, you had all of his acolytes working on policy, writing 900-page proposals for what to do and looking granularly at each agency, all these facets of government that the first time Trump might not have even known existed and now intimately understands how to dismantle.
Let me pick up on the metaphor of an airplane. So in 2016, that was a notion that turned into a slogan, that turned into a surprising electoral result. And once in the White House, it wasn't one plane. They were building different planes. And they had obstructionist air traffic controllers within the White House and within the administration.
What a timely metaphor. Keep going.
Because they were at cross purposes, and there were rivalries within the White House on policy, on politics, on tone, and lots of other things. And so that undercut the president's understanding of what was happening around him and his ability to project things either legislatively or through executive action. That's not the case this time. The pace is quicker for a reason, everything that was just said. There is now a forged reality, sort of like how you make a sword. You pound this policy, you pound these ideas into a hard-edged approach. And it is across Washington. I mentioned a few things off the top, but it's also tariffs, it's immigration. It's almost everything. And all of the various constituent parties within the Republican ranks have coalesced and seen that this is the means by which they get what they want. And Trump is the single most important factor in determining if they will be successful on their agenda item. And there is only one way to stay inside that circle, and that is to be on the same plane with your seatbelt fastened and eyes front.
Anything to add, John?
I mean, I think our job is the same. And it's trying not to get drawn into what Trump tried to do explicitly in January of 2017 when I think Steve Bannon first used the phrase and then he used it after, the opposition party. The media is the opposition party. We're not the opposition party. We have a job to cover. This is a highly consequential presidency, and you know, we have to cover it. We have to ask the tough questions. We have to check the facts and do our jobs.
There is a notion, and just for everybody out there to hear, this is my second time covering a Trump administration, but this is my first time being a White House reporter for a Trump administration. And during transition, what I heard when I was, going to Mar-a-Lago and doing source meetings is that you're going to have more fun. Covering Republicans is more fun. And so I want to ask you guys whether you think that's true, whether you think that's a bunch of, excuse my French this morning, BS, and why you think, if that is true, Republicans just feel more comfortable talking to the press. I know it's a loaded question.
You're asking if we're having fun yet?
Are you having fun yet?
Define fun.
I mean, like, I'll just say quickly, like, fun is not the word I would use. That's
I agree.
That's definitely not the word. But let me get at what you just hit on. One of the striking things about the Biden White House, I covered the Obama White House as well, and the Harris campaign, was how much they kept the press at arm's length. I mean, the perception among Democrats is you guys are all, press is all in the tank for Democrats. And, look, in reality, it was often a very frustrating experience covering those Democratic White Houses because you had so little access to the principles you were covering. I think of the period of time after Kamala Harris, after Biden dropped out, she goes all the way through the convention and all the way past the convention until she finally sits down for her first interview, and it's timed out to be exactly 20 minutes, and Walz has to be there, and then Walz disappears and doesn't really do any interviews for the course of the. I mean, he did some. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but so walled off. And in Trump, it's like every day it feels like there's. And look, I don't think it's going to always be this way, and it wasn't always this way in Trump's first term. But he has already taken more questions by far than Biden took during 4 years from reporters.
Fun was a troll. Okay, that straight up. That's what they mean. You're going to have fun, meaning you're going to be relentlessly busy. You'll have better ratings, which Trump cares about. He thinks we care about. And to John's point, we added this up. On the second day of his presidency, second time around, Donald Trump had already addressed the public for more than 4 hours. On his second day, you take the inauguration speech, then the thing at Capital One Arena, then all the other questions, he took 4 hours in about a day and a half. And that pace has continued because he wants to be relentlessly accessible, relentlessly accountable. That is a function of how he views the presidency and the means by which he continues to create volatility and set the pace of things. And that's what they mean by fun. He sets the pace of things. You will chase, and you will have to chase relentlessly, and we think that's fun for you whether you do or not.
I'll also say, as all of us are up here as journalists, because our goal is just to understand. If you can understand because the principal player is helping you understand, giving you their point of view, that's why you want time with the president. Hill reporters are we're so spoiled about this because you can find the principals everywhere. You chase them in the hall, they always got to come back to their office or go vote on the floor. You get spoiled that way. But we've all covered a range of different candidates and campaigns. The reason you want to hear from these people is because you want to just be able to have the best understanding of where each relevant party is on whatever issue of the day that you're covering. And so I have always felt that it's wonderful that President Trump is accessible, wants to take questions. I think regularly you have to make sure that the words and the actions, how do you contextualize them? Are they a negotiating tactic? Are they actually what he's really telling people? And that's where more reporting comes in. But I think that's probably what they mean. And then on Capitol Hill, the same could be said for the first 2 years of the Biden administration. When you have control of both houses of Congress and the White House, it's time to do some legislating. And for people, I'll speak for myself, I think policymaking is fun. I think it's interesting to see ideas come together, fall apart, maybe come back together again. And I think that's where, as a reporter, you just want something to sink your teeth into. So yeah, it's a troll, but they're not wrong that we're busy, there's things to cover, and there's things that we want to help people understand.
Well, it's like, you get on a roller coaster to be tossed around and flipped upside down and in the name of fun, right? So I think day to day, that's a little bit what I feel like, or like my brain's been in a washing machine about 5 times. And the challenge there is there's a lot of stuff happening. And I think when I was out on the campaign trail and talking to voters, part of the frustration was like, nothing is moving in Washington. Well, boy, things are moving right now. They're just moving, like this. The challenge for us as reporters is, I think, not to just be reactive, because I think that's where Flood the Zone really works in keeping us from, really doing original enterprise reporting and digging underneath and not just responding to the shiny thing. And the thing for our readers and our audiences is you can't point everyone 360 all of the time. And right now with this administration, things are happening 360. Things are happening on foreign policy, on domestic policy, on government, in every agency of government. So the challenge is, okay, if you can only point people in one direction at a time, where do you point them at what time?
Yeah. And I think that speaks to this White House's real kind of demand for control, not just controlling their own narrative, but really trying to control how journalists are doing their own jobs. I mean, I feel like it's kind of an understatement to say that this first 6 weeks in office has put news organizations in kind of a difficult place. Obviously, the administration has canceled subscriptions to Politico Pro and other publications. It continues to block our, beloved colleagues at the Associated Press from the Oval Office, press conference, to Air Force One over their non-use of Gulf of America. They've taken back the power to decide who covers the president at any given day, away from the White House Correspondent Association. I wonder if we could take a bird's eye view. How do you decide, and I know that this decision is made in concert with your companies, but how do you approach whether or not you individually or your companies individually should be involved in some of these, frankly, controversies or these attempts to pull access from our colleagues and maybe potentially eventually from ourselves?
Well, I mean, I think that the White House Correspondent Association, which we're all members of, has joined the AP's lawsuit in the form of an amicus brief, making it clear that you don't want the government deciding who covers the government. You don't want the president deciding who is going to cover the president. I assume that those that are involved in this decision right now from the White House side wouldn't like the idea of a future Democratic president, throwing out, a conservative outlet or a mainstream outlet that they didn't, like something about because of their editorial policy. It's a bad precedent. So I think you make that clear. But look, we have jobs to cover. We have jobs to do. We have to cover the news.
And look, this is a litigious president. There's pending litigation. I don't think that's a secret to anyone in this room. Against my company. That's an issue. That's an issue that's being dealt with at layers much, much, much higher than mine. That is a shadowing factor in all of this. not just us, but anyone else, and where that's directed. This spat with the AP fundamentally makes the president look much weaker than I think he realizes. He doesn't need to keep the AP out. Come on. That is undercutting everything he said last night about removing censorship and government control over speech and access. And now the White House will find itself trying to dial this in and out. And I think for a while they'll like it. But I think over a while, based on my knowledge of the president, he'll get bored with it. Because it makes him look weak. Fundamentally, it makes him look weak. And he is dictating what the state says a vast and important international news organization does with its style book. That's not American democracy.
Look, I think there are no easy answers, and there are no real silver bullet answers for any of us here. But something Mr. Karl said earlier about the opposition.
Karl.
Mr. Karl.
Please don't call me Mr. Garrett, please, I beg of you.
Mr. Major, maybe.
Mr. Major to
Mr.
you.
Major. I think that in the first Trump term, the media, we at large, did allow ourselves to be placed into the bucket of the opposition, of the resistance. And I think that did some fundamental damage to the Fourth Estate. And that is what I think we all are trying to prevent this time around. On the other hand, you don't want to sit by and watch the Fourth Estate get chipped away at either. So we're in a really between a rock and a hard place. But I think the best thing we can do right now is what you said, Mr. Karl, is do our jobs, report the hell out of this story for whatever perch of access we do or do not have. And it's true. Trump. There's a lot of bluster about fake news, but at the end of the day, he loves to spar with a reporter. He loves it. And so if there is a point where the slippery slope ends up with all conservative right-wing publications in the White House asking questions that are not challenging, I don't think he's going to like that.
And my last question before we turn it over to our audience for a couple questions is, I think, picking up on your point, Dasha, which is that we know over the last several years, trust in media, trust in journalists, I think you could extend it to trust in fact and truth given to America by journalists, has really fallen. A lot of people don't necessarily believe in what we're doing or believe in what we're saying. And I think that there is no silver bullet answer, but I wonder if you guys have thoughts about how we can win trust back from Americans that really allow us to do our job and do it effectively.
I think about this on a regular basis, and I think that there is no silver bullet answer. Sorry, I host at 5 a.m. But the way I think about it is like a very singular and individual way, right? Which is that I trust and believe that all of my colleagues here and most of my colleagues in the press corps are in this because they just want to give people the most accurate information in a timely fashion that they possibly can. The way that I try to breed a little bit more of that trust when I'm not on television on MSNBC or on NBC is I am using social media to try to illuminate as much transparency about the process of reporting as I possibly can. I regularly try to go on stories and answer questions. I regularly try to go on stories and give a little bit more of my take that maybe I didn't get to on my show or on other shows. And I think the more that you can show people that the media apparatus, that this administration and others have been so adept at trying to chip away at the credibility of, we're not a faceless entity. We are people who are curious and full of dignity and passion for the work that we do. And I think the more that we can show that to people, again, on a very case-by-case and individual basis, that's the way that I think about it. And I think that at the end of the day, my North Star is always that storytelling really matters. People seeing themselves reflected in policy and political conversations engages them. And that's exactly what democracy is all about.
And try to understand where people are coming from.
Yeah.
Totally.
Really get in there. I mean, this is, it's a combination of what Dasha was talking about, in terms of
Mrs. Burns.
Exactly. In terms of we don't take sides. I mean, look, there's a great role. There's opinion journalism. There's a storied history of opinion journalism in America. And as our friend Major knows, Mr. Garrett, back in the early days of the Republic, all of the newspapers were partisan. Okay, so when the First Amendment was written, there was no idea of a kind of a fact-based, non-aligned journalism really didn't exist. But look, that's what we do, and I think it's really important to stick to that, stick to the facts, not take sides, not take the debate, not be the opposition party, and really try to dig and understand where they're coming from. Look, roughly half the country really likes what's going on in the White House right now, and most of the elected representatives on the Republican side in Congress are thrilled with what they're seeing. Let's try to understand what that's all about and talk about that, and also talk about why roughly half the country is deeply anxious about what's happening in the White House, and deeply concerns and thinks that democracy is at risk, and are concerned about their livelihoods. Let's understand those stories and tell those stories, and not take sides.
To John's point, when he was Secretary of State, Thomas Jefferson paid for and created a newspaper to run against the president he was serving. That's a partisan press from inside the government. Okay, that's Thomas Jefferson. So, to Jonathan's point, we have a long, not distinguished, we have a long history of dealing with press in this country that was overtly and by design and structure partisan. The current economic environment for journalism is battered by one irreversible trend: choose your own adventure journalism. People can find whatever they constitute and believe to be, to their satisfaction, journalism. To their satisfaction. Influencers are journalists. Pontificators are journalists. Editorialists are journalists. Randos are journalists.
I love Rando.
Huh?
Great. Rando's great.
Yeah, So that is a market force that we cannot do anything but adjust to. And the adjustment is difficult because the adjustment eats into our market share, meaning our audience share. Because if journalism is all about choose your own adventure, and journalism for you is a kind of thing that doesn't dislodge your worldview, doesn't in any way challenge your perception of either facts, reality, or just what makes you happy, if your consumptive patterns with your choose your adventure journalism is to make yourself happy and reinforced from morning to night, we have a problem.
Well, the problem is...
Because journalism isn't supposed to do that. The best journalism challenges all sorts of perceptions, forces things into the public space that members of Congress might not want in the public space, an administration might not want in the public space, a governor might not want in the public space, a mayor may not want in the public space. And it is discomforting by design. But choose your own adventure journalism in the marketplace devalues that. That is an epic commercial challenge for everyone in this business. And I don't have anything, I don't even have gunpowder shavings, let alone a silver bullet to deal with that. It's a vortex we're all in the middle of, and we're adjusting to as best we can.
Well, and I don't think we can put the toothpaste back in the tube here, right? So we have to find a way through it. And I think part of that is being better than the randos, right? I think there are two challenges for us that we should try to solve for. Number one, I think the bubble problem. I think that a lot of us are in our own little bubbles, whether it's in DC or New York or California, the Bay Area, Los Angeles. I think there are a lot of journalists that are reporting from those places, and we get a little bit consumed by the conversation of where we are, or by the conversation of whatever Twitter X-verse Elon Musk has curated for us, and that's not actually reflective of reality. And so where there might be too much outrage in our bubble or too much glee in our bubble. The reality when you start going out and talking to, Larry the farmer or Jen the mom of 5 who's trying to, buy eggs, there's a mix of both outrage and glee at what's happening. There's a much more nuanced understanding or lack of understanding sometimes because it does feel opaque, the workings of government for those people. And number 2, the how problem. Like, I'm always surprised at how little people understand about how journalists do their jobs, about how we actually get information and give it to the people. And I think we take it for granted because it's what we do every day. But like, a lot of people think we are also finding stuff on the internet and then reporting it. And they don't understand that how much time we spend talking to sources and how many texts, how many lunches and coffees and drinks and hunts for documents and, that the process. And to Ali's point, I think as much as we can reveal parts of like, this is how we actually get information. This is why we stand behind it, even when people in power call it fake news. I think that's really important.
Yeah, news gathering aspect. Okay, I hear a couple solutions. I'm interested in this.
It's not all gloom and doom.
So we're going to turn it over to the audience. Does anybody have a question for the Mr. and Mrs. up on the stage? You're tall, so I'll go with you.
Oh, thank you. Hi. So my question is on, and you touched on this a little bit, but for-profit journalism. So you're Axel Springer, you're Sherry Redstone, you're Bob Iger, you're Spinco, and wherever that's going.
Yes, thank you.
So what is your advice to this group of young journalists who are, your reach is none, given social media, you're speaking to the same crowd over and over that is not significant to the overall American population. The viewpoints that you're presenting are not reaching any of the voters. So what is your advice to this group of people who face a 30-year career in front of them of what to do?
Can I just disagree with you for a second? I think that NOTUS has done like some incredible work and has gotten has clearly broken through, which is a real lesson. That, I mean, in a way that
your normal voter in Iowa knows what NOTUS is?
I think they've seen some of the work that NOTUS has done, yes. Absolutely. Okay. Because it's broken through and it's been...
I would also agree with that. But we take your point, and we're going to answer the question. But I certainly, walking through the airports of America, have had people come up to me and talk about it. So I do think that we are breaking through. But go ahead, Mr. John.
I don't mean to be argumentative, but I think in many ways that the whole process here has been democratized in a way. I mean, if you wanted to go back, to when Major and I were first breaking in, I mean, if you weren't in the New York Times or you weren't on CBS or ABC, I mean, there was nothing. Right. You weren't going to get through it all. Right. Now you have an ability, even a rando, but good journalism can break through. So I would just say, and I hate to sound a little bit like a broken record, so I apologize, but I think that if you can focus on doing good journalism that is fact-based, that breaks news, that brings new information out, and you can do that, you have access to the information. You may not have access to all the same sources, but you have access to a wealth of information. You can do good work, clearly presented, not taking sides. You can have an impact.
And by the way, most of what you're seeing on the newsy TikToks and social media, it's based on our stuff. Mm-hmm. Like, they are using NOTUS and CBS and NBC and ABC and Politico and the Times and the Post for all of those conversations that are happening. Like, I can't tell you how often I go on there or my friends will text me, and yes, maybe they didn't get to the headline via NBC or Politico, but they're like, oh, I see your byline, or I see the story that you reported on such and such TikTok. And so if we didn't exist, a whole lot of those influencers that are making money off of our content would not have a lot to talk about.
Yeah, we can go on.
Okay, here we go, right in the front.
I'm sure that many of you have seen the Axios piece on the MAGA media empire that has been built over the past 4 years. If you haven't, I would encourage you to read it. I read it twice yesterday because it's so illustrative of, how the MAGA group has built an echo chamber that has disrupted the news media. With the economics focused on all these influencers and people that are making money there, and not having the journalistic integrity that you guys have to face, it's a very hard nut to crack. How do you go about rebuilding that? And is that done in your corporate rooms, or is that going to be done by you as individual journalists who, sort of figure that out and take it up the channel? That's a tough question, I know.
Yeah, it is. And we're going to, I think, relentlessly fall back on the core principles of journalism and doing that work and exhibiting that work in contrast to things that are not journalistic. And my basic definition of journalism is you are a witness who does not profit from the witnessing. Pure and simple. You are an observer who does not have a vested interest in the outcome of your observation. Influencers do. Echo chamberists do. Straight up. And Dasha made a mention of all the things that are going on. In a normal circumstance, what the president said Sunday about creating a cryptocurrency reserve and an instantaneous blowback from the libertarian wing of the cryptocurrency faction within the Republican Party and how that blew up in Silicon Valley would have been a 2 or 3 day story, because one other White House would probably only have talked about that. That's completely been obliterated because there's just no space for it. But it's a real thing. My only point of bringing that up is echo chambers have a hard time preserving themselves, because eventually, even within the hardened aspect of echo chambers, divergences of opinion and loyalty tests begin to emerge. And every revolution has gone through this. And so that is a factor that is going to play out in that world. We have no control over that. What we have a control of is the witnessing that we do not have a vested interest in. And we're just going to continue to do that.
And I think the other piece of this too, and what all of us have touched on in various ways, is there is a splintering underway beyond media. And I think one of the misters used the phrase of a democratization, small d democratization of media. And I think that that allows people to access news in all sorts of different ways, for good and for bad. I think the thing that I would challenge young journalists to do is something that I think many of us have had to adopt and play with in real time, which is, how do you make sure you're not seeding those spaces on TikTok, on Reels, on Twitter, on Blue Sky, whatever, right? The list goes on. But how do you make sure that you're playing where your audience is, so that, yes, I roll out my show at 5 a.m. every day, but I know that I get a second life of the thing that I think is the most important kernel when I put it on social media, and I make sure that those videos get disseminated, because maybe someone's not watching MSNBC at 5 a.m. They're crazy, because everyone is. But at the same time, you have to give your stuff a second life and make sure that as much as people are using our information, we should be playing in those spaces too. And so I think there's a real opportunity there, as much as it's overwhelming and there's a fracturing, to really cut to the heart of the noise and try to make yourself a voice that is trusted in this media ecosystem.
Okay, well, we are out of time. I would love to take more questions. You can come up and ask me them, and I'll try to point you in the right direction. But thank you so much to my panel for your fantastic words and thoughts. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And now I will turn things over to Josh Dawsey at the Now Wall Street Journal. Thank you, guys.
Hi, guys. Thanks for being with us this morning. I'm thrilled to welcome Bret Baier of a special report with Fox News. Thank you. Really good to be here. You know, the big boss, Robert Allbritton here, is very, very persuasive. And I show up, and he's not here. So I'm hoping that he's watching via stream today. I did make it, Robert. Yeah, we're thrilled to have you. Bret, you're sort of a veteran journalist who's covered multiple administrations now, including the second time of the Trump administration. The first month or so, what has surprised you most about his return and how this White House has worked versus what you expected?
Well, I mean, that's
It's a big question because I think, first of all, I thought the other panel was really great as far as laying out what it's like covering this administration. It is like drinking from a fire hose, and it is, 7 shiny things in one day. And my biggest job during the day is to try to fit it all into 40 plus minutes of a news report special report at 6 p.m. I do think this iteration of Donald Trump is different. I think he is more comfortable in his skin. To Major's point, he's been there before. His people have been there before, and they've built several planes that they are trying to do different things. I think the first administration, they spent a lot of time on the defensive. And I think that was, it played out in how he dealt with not only the media, but everybody else. So I think there is this confidence. I think you saw it last night. Internally, the word went out that Bill Clinton had the longest State of the Union and joint address at 1 hour, 28 minutes. And I think he was looking at the clock last night. I think he was, I'm going to get 1:39.
It's not bad. That's not bad.
Thank you, Josh.
I'm not going to do mine, but
I don't get to do it on the show that much.
On Friday, you had a pretty news-making interview with President Zelensky, who was here. I'm sure you all saw the volcanic clash in the Oval Office, and then he was kicked out, and then he went over to Fox that evening and interviewed with you. Take us sort of behind the scenes of, after all of that happened on Friday, sort of how you prepared for that interview, what he was like offset, what he was trying to accomplish with you. I just thought that was such a fascinating moment, and I'd love to hear you tell the audience sort of about that experience.
Sure. I mean, it was a big week. I've been working to try to get world leaders on the show for a long time and tried to do it for years, and going back to the Crown Prince in Saudi Arabia, MBS, and others. And it just all came together that week. I had Emmanuel Macron earlier in the week, then the UK Prime Minister Starmer midweek, and then Zelensky confirmed on Thursday. I had gone the year before to the front lines on the anniversary of the war, and we went just about a half mile from the Russian positions to do an interview about the anniversary of the war. So there was kind of a trust with his people. We had made the effort to get there. We took a 12-hour train from Poland, a 7-hour armored truck to Kharkiv, a 3-hour armored truck to the front lines, and sat there doing the interview with artillery coming back and forth. So I think that there was this sense that, I was going to be fair. And he was canceling all of these things. So first of all, I was on my way back from New York. I had a shoot to do in New York, and the Oval Office meeting was happening, and I was watching it on my phone. And I went, wow, this interview just got really, really interesting. And then my phone blew up. Is this going to happen?
Were you expecting?
I was expecting him, to cancel. I really was, because I knew they started canceling other events, the Hudson Institute and other things, and the Ukrainians called and said he's still on. I was worried that it was going to be a translation thing, and it really was going to be tough to do. They said he's going to do it in English, and so we just prepared for that. So
Tell the audience a little bit about that. Obviously there's a huge event on Friday. It changes probably the tenor of your questions, what you're going to ask, how you're going to prepare. What did you sort of do Friday afternoon to get ready for Zelensky to be on set with you?
Yeah, well, first of all, I got back from New York. I was there about 2 hours before the interview, and I laid out, and what I do, my process is sort of laying out a blueprint of where I think I'm going to go with questions, and then think about how he'll answer them. I wanted to start with what had come out of the White House and from the president's Truth Social about how he thought he was disrespected, and did he feel the same way as Zelensky? And did he feel he needed to apologize? We decided that we were going to blow commercial breaks because it was that important. And Fox has been really supportive of the news division, really from the beginning. I've been there 27 years. The Atlanta Bureau started in my apartment with a fax machine and a cell phone. And I've covered the Southeast and South America and the Pentagon, the White House, and I took over for Bret 16 years ago as the anchor. But Fox has always supported the news division, and on this day, everybody realized how important that was. So we blew 2 commercial breaks, which is a lot of money for us, and let this conversation go and let him really say his piece as he wanted to say it. And it obviously got a lot of eyeballs. It was about 7 million viewers, the highest rated TV show on that day.
On a Friday night.
Yeah.
Did you pick up anything from him off set or from his people that sort of gave you insight into, how he was thinking about the situation and where he was going to go next?
Well, he was nervous. And they were nervous, more importantly. They were very nervous about what he was going to say or not say. And we wanted to make sure that his translator was there in case there was anything that he needed to clarify. And he did throughout the interview, turn and say, what does he mean by spat? And so we just left it in and that interaction with the translator. And then afterwards, I said, do you think you can still get a deal? And he said, yes, I think I can get a deal. I have to do some things in Europe, but I think I can get a deal. And so I think that, that led to that post that we saw yesterday. And now I'm hearing that Macron and Starmer may accompany him to the White House to do this signing, to make it a bigger thing. Now, if I could get all three on at once, that would be a real common ground interview.
Yeah, so he admitted sort of afterwards that there were lots of things he had to do to get this back on track and that the day had gone not particularly well for him.
Yeah, it took him a while to say it, but he said he regretted it. It was bad, and it was not good for Ukraine. Listen, whatever you think about him, whatever you think about, the allegations of corruption, of whether he's doing things the right way, of whether he's saying things the right way, he is in the middle of a war, and his people have died and been kidnapped, and I've seen it firsthand. It's a mess, and there's a lot of criticism about how the administration, how the president talks about it, but the bottom line, if they get to peace, that's going to be a big win for the world.
Yeah. You mentioned having a lot of world leaders on your show, having, Macron and Starmer and others. Why do you think the world leaders, when they come to America, are coming on Fox? I mean, is it just simply because they want to send a message to Trump and the White House? Are they trying to accomplish something broader? Do you get any sense of kind of what these folks are doing coming on your show?
So I've really worked it. I'm not going to say that that's the reason they come, but I mean, I've gone to a lot of breakfasts at ambassadors' residences for a long time to try to work it before that. That, number one. Number two, it is the highest viewership that they can touch across America, and probably a key viewer is President Trump, and he watches. And lastly, I think Special Report spends a lot of time on foreign policy, and there's not a lot of news programs anymore. First of all, there's not a lot of news programs anymore. Let's just stop the sentence there. And then secondly, there's not a lot of news programs that spend a lot of time on foreign policy, and we do every single day at least some aspect of world news, and we think that's important.
And he does have the highest ratings. He can fact check that. That's right. At 6 o'clock. The 45 minutes you have every night, or exactly how many minutes is it?
It's about 44 with commercials, yeah.
Walk the audience through how you decide what stories are worthy of your time that evening, how you decide what should be in the lineup, what should we cover, what should we not cover, what's important, but maybe we can't get to it tonight, how you make those judgments every night before you go on air.
Yeah, it is a process. We have a morning meeting at 10 a.m. I'm with all my staff. We've talked to all the bureaus around the country, all the different beats here in Washington. For the news show, for Special Report, it is a bottom-up bubbling of what is news of the day. It changes 5-6 times through the day, maybe more, as we rip up the rundown and change the way it works. I like to think that our editorial judgment about what leads is usually what's happening now, the most important. Sometimes there are big things that become the lead that we didn't know were even going to happen. Just moments ago, the Supreme Court ruled 5-4 that the administration has to pay $2 billion in foreign aid on USAID contractors that already have finished their work. I think that might be surprising to a lot of people. So I texted Shannon Bream while I was back there, and she's now working on doing that. John Roberts and Justice Coney Barrett voted with the affirmative, and I think that's going to be an interesting thing as you look at all the things the administration's doing and may get pushed back on inside the legal system.
I was about to say, does that lead your show tonight? But it's early in the day tonight.
It's too early. It's too early. I mean, we'll have seven other things.
This is the Trump White House, so to speak. You've interviewed Trump a number of times on your show, on the phone, on all sorts of occasions. I'd love to sort of get your thoughts on, and I've interviewed him a few times before as well, how you prepare for the interview, how you decide when to fact check, when to interject, what questions to ask, what questions not to ask. I mean, I have often found he's an extraordinarily difficult person to interview. It's sometimes hard to keep him on what you want him to talk about or questions, and sort of, and then other times he makes huge amounts of news in sort of surprising ways. And I'd love for you just to sort of give the crowd a sense of how you prepare if you're talking to him for the Super Bowl interview, for example.
Yeah, the Super Bowl interview is a little different because obviously it's the Super Bowl, and it's you have to talk about the game and sports a little bit, and it's a little bit lighter. We went on and talked a long time that aired all on Special Report, that we covered a lot more topics than just what aired on the Super Bowl. The last time prior to that I interviewed him was pretty contentious, and made some news about the back and forth. I think he Truth Socialed that it was nasty, and I've been on the back end of some of those. Here's how I plan: is first of all, he sometimes repeats what he said on the trail a lot.
Correct.
And so what's coming. And so you murder board, you expect him to say this, and then you get in on the breath, when he, and you maybe redirect. He says, I like to do the weave. Sometimes I weave from topic to topic. And
how do you redirect, though? Because I've often found that to be the challenge.
It is the challenge. And I said, Mr. President, going back to the original, I think being respectful, in the question, how you ask it elicits a better answer. President Trump does better, believe it or not, to the other panel's points, with a challenging interview than he does with a fawning interview.
Some of his biggest news, what he said things his aides really did not want him to say, were in fawning interviews where he thought the questioner was friendly and he let his guard down and said some things that he had to clean up later.
Exactly. And so I think he appreciates that, which is why we're standing with the AP and the White House Correspondents Association. I've talked about it publicly and worked behind the scenes on that front, because I do think it's important not to set precedent on that way, just like the other panel talked about.
Besides just sort of redirects, what do you find is the most challenging part of interviewing him one-on-one, and sort of how do you prepare for it?
Yeah, so the fact-checking real time, you have to debate what is worth dying on that hill and having that moment, because there's a lot to fact-check, as you know, through something he says. But in an effort to get news, I think you try to steer him to the questions you're trying to go to, the heart of the issue. He does answer questions more than any other president I've ever seen. I think he's already answered some 1,400 questions from the press in some way, shape, or form. Comparison to the last president, contrast rather, is night and day. He eventually answers the question. You just have to give him time sometimes to get there, and that's a challenge in a TV interview especially.
Right. It's different sort of in print. If I have 30 minutes with him, I can sort of let him wander off and then bring him back and then whatever. But when you're on a limited time period and you're live on camera, I'm guessing there's different contours in how you feel like you have to handle that.
Right. And so I've interviewed, obviously, other presidents. President Obama, days before the Obamacare vote in the House. And, I just remember being in the Blue Room asking questions, and the first answer was 3 minutes. And the second answer was 3 minutes and 30 seconds. And they gave me 20 minutes overall. And there was a guy, a White House staffer, with a phone that was ticking back from 20 minutes, like a time bomb. And, I'm looking at it going, wow, if I don't step in here, I'm going to get rolled.
The president in the wrong way, you also sort of pardon my French, look like an asshole. So
Yeah. So there's a fine
decide
line.
how to interrupt someone live on television.
There's
right?
a fine line, and sometimes you're good at it. Sometimes you're, a little bit right there.
What do you think has been your most productive interview with Trump over the years? Where you felt like you walked away, you were like, I feel like I actually got something out of that benefited, the public in a significant way.
Well, the last one before the Super Bowl interview, we dealt with a lot of the legal challenges and a lot of the lawfare stuff, and he went into detail that he hadn't gone into before. At that time, that was really newsy.
That was newsworthy.
And, I think he came out of it thinking it was great, but then the people around him said, not so great, and then he had a different reaction. So, listen, right now, after this election, like I said, he is comfortable in his skin. I think he wants to take the challenge on with as many questions that he takes. You look at these world leader press conferences. I mean, it's usually 2 and 2, as you know. You cover the White House. And now it's like 5 and 6. They go to the pool spray in the Oval Office, and that's what happened with Zelensky. It was 50 minutes long. Yeah. And actually that dust-up, everybody doesn't realize, happened on the last question. The very last question, up until that moment.
42 minutes in.
Up until that moment, it was actually pretty cordial, back and forth. And then that last question, the vice president, it just devolved quickly.
Yeah, on the World Leader Days, he talks so much that I have a little television on my desk. And the other day, thought to myself, every time I've looked at the TV, Trump has been on taking more questions. I mean, it's sort of, the number of his time is astonishing.
Think about how much oxygen he takes out of the room as far as world news. There is no other figure we will ever see that commands that kind of attention around the world, whether it is totally negative, totally positive, or just what he's doing day to day.
Right. Well, you interviewed Kamala Harris this fall, and one of her people later told me that one of the reasons she agreed to do that interview was because she felt like she needed to win Fox viewers to have a chance for the election. There were folks in the center, right of center, that they felt like they were not getting to any other way. They decided to come on and do your show. Make the case sort of to this room why more Democrats should come on Fox News. I mean, I know Pete Buttigieg does, some others do, but some Democrats just say, I'm not going on there, I'm not doing it. What's your argument for why Democrats should come on Fox News?
Well, first of all, a lot of Democrats come on my show. I've started this thing about 2 years ago called Common Ground. It's where I bring a Democrat and Republican together to talk about things they're working on as opposed to what they're fighting about. And we do that usually once a week. So the odd couples are really interesting. I mean, it's been, Ted Cruz and Elizabeth Warren, or, some really interesting across the aisle stuff that they're working on different ideas. So they do that, number one. Number two, we get the most Democrats and independents watching than any other channel combined. So just pure eyeballs. We did a
in the 6 p.m. hour, or?
Really across the board at the network, but definitely in the 6 p.m. hour, it's very strong. Prior to the election, we did a thing, Media Relations actually put it together, the ratings in the 7 swing states, and we were about 65% of the cable audience, watching. So it's about reach, I think, and over time, I think that we've made clear on my show that we welcome the different views. I try to have a balanced panel assessing things every night. And so tough but fair is what you're going to get. And more Democrats are spreading that word. So, I've had a lot of senators come on prior to the election. And as I said, Common Ground every week.
Yeah, I'm going to ask one final question, and I'm going to open it up for a couple from you guys. So get thinking of good questions. But, You've spent a lot of time with Trump off camera and playing golf, I think, with him at times and talking to him on the phone and sort of having a relationship with him. For sort of a sophisticated Washington audience who watches him, nonstop on TV, sees him every day on camera, sees him, to the point sometimes I think some people will probably get tired of seeing him. Others might want to see him more. What might surprise them about what he's like when the camera's not running? When you're just with him in a room, you're at one of his clubs, you're talking to him, you're sort of, pitching him on an interview or interacting with him. Because I can think of several things from my perspective. But what might these folks not know about sort of how he behaves when the glare of the camera is not on him?
Yeah, first of all, those interactions and the golf and everything is not happening all the time.
Right.
It's a rare event, but it's definitely happened, and I have had those interactions. And I think any journalist would take the off-the-record time with a president of the United States to pick his brain on what's next, to talk about what the next thing might be that he doesn't talk about publicly. And he's very open like that. If you talk to Democrats who've been around him in those settings, off camera, he really, one, is funny and can make people laugh, and two, focuses on them like they're the one in the room that he has is the attention. And I've seen it firsthand. Now he can go off the rails and say something that everybody goes, "Whoa, wait a second." But you also learn about what's driving him. I think he likes making the left's head explode when he muses that he's going to run in 2028. He's not running in 2028. He's done. I think he has fun in that. Sometimes, people say he goes over the edge a lot. Sometimes it's by design, and he's much more laid back in person behind the scenes. He is a very good golfer. And he will tell you that.
Does he cheat?
No, I haven't seen it. Now, caddies may be very active, but I haven't seen it in person.
There was a book written by Rick Riley, a journalist, called Commander in Chief, that sort of documented, according to that book.
Now, he will tell. I can't attest to the 33 club championships.
He's won in a row.
But I can attest that I've played with him, and he's a very good golfer.
I was listening to audio he did of a fundraiser recently for my book, and he was talking about that after he got shot in the ear, Secret Service really beefed up its security on his golf courses, and he was telling his donors that the worst part is I can't kick the ball out of the rough anymore because every time I look up, there's a Secret Service guy behind the tree. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. We have time for a couple of questions. Does anyone have a question for Bret? Go ahead.
I don't know how much it's impacted Fox News, but we've seen this as the first administration that genuinely is embracing having influencers allowed near the press pool, allowed to field questions with the terrible rollout of phase 1 of the Epstein files last week. Fox News has started to have a pretty big social media presence on TikTok, on X, pretty much everywhere. How are you guys pivoting in an administration that's embracing new media? And has it really impacted anything about the way you do your jobs?
That's a great question. I think social media has changed a lot. First of all, I think I covered the Pentagon, and since then, such change has happened. And being a leader in this time is pretty tough because before you make a decision, people have reacted to it around the world twice on X and Reels and everything else. So I think it's more challenging being a leader. Covering that, we use social media as a tool. It informs us. We get a lot of feedback from it, but it's also a place where you have to be careful. And I look at my job as like an ice hockey goalie, trying to prevent the bad pucks from getting through. And there's a lot of bad pucks on social media and elsewhere. So I think it's a challenge, Josh. I mean, you can weigh in. I think you got a lot of work to do to weed through what's real and what's not.
Yeah, I don't know how you exactly weed through what's real and what's not. I will say, I think we see viewers and folks more like authenticity. Like if you watch what a lot of anchors are doing. I mean, I've seen this recently with Caitlin Collins. She's doing these videos where she's kind of walking up and down the White House lawn, not super well produced. I mean, they're well produced, but you know what I mean. They're not like standing in front of a set and doing all of that. And those get a lot of views. I think one of the things influencers and the media ecosphere has changed is that they like folks, looking more authentic, straight to camera, selfies. I mean, I don't know if that's the future of the news, but that's what I see a lot more of a viewer desire for.
I'll also say that my kids, 17 and 14, two boys, they do not see me on television. They see me on Instagram Reels, on YouTube, on some clip that made it someplace. So, the digestion, the getting the news is different for kids, and we're changing. I mean, we're shifting, And that's going to be a lot of focus, I think, for our network coming up.
Okay, we'll go right here.
Good morning. My name is Robi Kakongi, and I'm Uganda's ambassador to DC. And on behalf of my colleagues in the African Diplomatic Corps, we really would like to have an engagement to where our story is told, in particular Uganda as well. And it's just, when you mention social media, you'd be amazed at how popular your face is in that space. So we just do really want to hear the American story, but also to know that the Ugandan and the African story is constructed in such a way that it's beyond aid and all those other things, and we can look towards trade and better things. Thank you.
Madam Ambassador, nice to meet you. We'll connect after this. We really value, as I mentioned, those foreign policy stories, including in Africa, and Uganda's story is one that we would follow. I'm actually this week having the president of the Congo on our show to talk about some of the issues that they're working on, and that they want to weigh in on their own minerals deal with the U.S. To try to get President Trump engaged in Rwanda. And I think those are issues that the American public just doesn't even know. And so we feel a responsibility to do world news more. Sometimes, for an audience, it's like eating your chicken and broccoli. It's not that every audience loves it, but when they get it, they realize that they're getting the full picture of the world, and we like to give that.
We'll do one final question, and then we have to wrap for time, unfortunately. Does anyone else have a question in the room? Okay.
Hey, Bret. Good to see you again.
Hey, you too.
Some of us
Pentagon days. I covered the Pentagon. He was there at the Pentagon.
Nice to see you again. Some of us are old enough to remember when you covered the Pentagon. And we're in a room of, I think, young and aspiring journalists. What of those experiences can you pass on to them in terms of what they might look for later in their career?
Yeah. So I'll tell a quick story. So I was covering the Southeast and South America, as I said, out of Atlanta, and 9/11 happened. And the first plane hit, and they said, you need to go to New York. And we went to book a plane. The second plane hit. They said, get in a car and start driving. And the third plane hit, and they said, go to the Pentagon. So I started doing live shots outside the Pentagon, burning Pentagon that night for Fox affiliates around the country. And I never left. That became my new job. A few days later, I was with Secretary Rumsfeld at the time as he was making the case for war overseas. And I called on a satellite phone from Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, to my buddy to get me an apartment here in D.C. And so the advice I have is, one, always do the dishes when you leave. Because when they moved my stuff from Atlanta, they just sent movers. The movers packed up all my stuff, including the chicken fettuccine and the dirty dishes wrapped up in a box. And when I got to the apartment from a 15-day trip, it was like an archaeological dig going through these boxes. But I joke, be ready for anything. Say yes as much as you can at the beginning. Be forward-leaning. Be the person that becomes indispensable so that they're like, he'll do it, she'll do it, and be that person. And I say sometimes you don't know how you're going to get there, but by the time you keep on keeping it on the road and driving, suddenly you're there. And that's really what happened with my career.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Bret. Thanks for coming on the panel with us.
Thank you.